Anyway, it's confession time. It's 14 minutes to 6 o'clock. If your confession is read out, then you get a smart speaker. Set it to confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's has a 12 certificate.
Good.
Just
Here
making that absolutely clear.
Yes.
Okay, this one is anonymous for reasons you're about to find out. Father Simon of the Collective, for reasons that will become clear, I wish to remain anonymous for this confession, not so much because of the seriousness of the incident, but the embarrassment caused me. Back in 1976, I was a very naive 12-year-old schoolboy in South Wales, in a valley town. To give you an idea of how naive and innocent I was, when all my schoolmates were listening to Yes and Pink Floyd, the first LP I bought was the Jeff Love Orchestra Big War movie themes. Swiftly followed by Jeff Love's Big Bond movie themes.
Great.
You get the picture. I was one of those completely unremarkable boys at school, uncool, invisible to girls, and hopeless at sport, but I did love Jeff Love's big movie theme albums.
Yeah.
So the incident I'm referring to here was when I was walking home from school one day, a distance of exactly 1 mile to the yard. I know this because I paced it out. I did tell you I was strange.
Wow.
But it has helped me in later life because whenever I have to visualize a mile, I picture that walk home from school and I'm invariably not far out. On this particular day in about 1976, my journey home was interrupted by a discovery 653 yards from my house. Walking through a quiet residential estate, I saw something lying in the gutter that attracted my attention. I don't know why I decided to investigate further, as I was not a particularly inquisitive boy, but some internal voice told me to have a closer look. I picked it up and I saw that it was a pair of women's stockings, or tights or something.
Ooh.
I wasn't quite sure. I was 12. And all of a sudden I had a wonderful idea. You see, in between listening to Jeff Love's latest movie theme orchestral interpretations and collecting football cards, Liverpool players only, of course, I had begun, so therefore forgiven,
Yes,
I had begun being allowed to watch more grown-up TV shows. I particularly remember A Bouquet of Barbed Wire, a show whose incestuous plot confused the hell out of me. Also, I, Claudius, which was no better.
Yeah.
But for me, the daddy of them all was the Sweeney. No confusing shenanigans there, just straightforward good guys against the bad guys. Always impressed by the way in which the Sweeney lay in wait for a blag about to go down, knowing that there would soon be a bunch of camouflage jacketed heavies piling out of the back of a transit van wielding baseball bats. I was nevertheless intrigued by the robber's choice of facial disguise. Did a pair of ladies' undergarments over the head really distort one's features enough to render them unidentifiable?
Yeah.
Well, I was about to find out. Pulling the nylon material over my head, I had, of course, neglected to consider why such an article of clothing had been dropped in the street in the first place. The first thing I was aware of was how tight the material was about my face.
Oh, lovely.
But I thought it has to be tight to properly stretch your face into an unrecognizable shape.
Obviously, yeah.
So I persevered and kept pulling until I could not go any further. Then I became enlightened. My first realization was that the material strained across my face was far thicker than I had anticipated, and what I was many years later to learn was called a pair of stockings rather than tights. This had two connected effects. Firstly, I had to breathe much harder to get air into my lungs, and secondly, I understood why the tights had been discarded in the first place. Knowing the delicacy of your listeners and the time of the broadcast, I cannot be too graphic here, but what began as a mild inquisitiveness now became a battle to survive. Not only was I gasping for air, but the very air I was gulping down was impure, to say the least. They say in these situations, maybe your life flashes before your eyes, and you see your long-dead relatives at the end of a darkened tunnel. But all I could think of was, what will they think when they find my body? What was he doing?
Yeah.
I was tugging at the nylon, trying to get it off my head, whilst at the same time trying not to breathe too hard. Eventually, I managed to wrestle free of the toxic nylon and threw it back in the gutter where the previous owner had no doubt expected it to remain. After several gulps of glorious fresh air, I composed myself and continued on the last 650 yards of my journey home. So although nobody else was hurt, inconvenienced or blamed for my mishap, forgiveness is still required. First of all, I must seek forgiveness from any residents of the street where this near fight to the death with the length of smelly nylon took place, in case they were watching and thought I was getting kitted up, ready to break in and terrorize them in their homes. But more importantly, After a 30-year career in the police, I have to seek forgiveness from the many hundreds of unknowing members of the public in the various places I have served. Forgiveness for them believing that they could sleep safely in their beds at night whilst protected by a person who was once stupid enough to try imitating a bank robber and being almost suffocated in the process. I never encountered any real-life bank robbers during my time in the police, but if ladies' undergarments are still the preferred facial disguise amongst modern-day thieves and hoodlums, may I recommend they buy new rather than rely on a pair of cast-offs. Anonymous in a South Welsh valley town. A splendid tale. Sister Susie, what do you say?
Well, I can't even believe that actually happened. Like, what if you saw a pair of tights on the street, even as a young inquisitive boy?
Put them on.
No, leave them there.
Yes.
Run away from them. I am gonna forgive because you were young, and I feel like, you went into the police, so you helped, and it's all fine in the end.
And he collected Liverpool cards, so I know which way this is going to go.
Yeah, well, it's pretty obvious
Matthew.
the way this is going to go. No surprise. Obviously a bit of a life lesson here, which is obviously don't start putting stuff on your head that you find in the gutter. I can't remember. It must have been a 70s thing to be putting your used tights into the gutter. I can't remember seeing any of those more recently. But clearly, this led our anonymous friend onto the life in the straight and narrow, and he's clearly been influenced by John Thor in the Sweeney, so it's all good. So definitely forgiven on all counts.
Okay, so it's the people's verdict. That's what we need next. Do you forgive our anonymous correspondent here from the South Welsh Valley town? On the text, please, 61054. It's the people's verdict. You start the word with Simon and then tell us what you think. And the people's verdict will be delivered by Matt in the studio after 6. And your confession, if you fancy a smart speaker, Simon at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. So a while back we had our confession from Anonymous in the South Welsh Valley town about the problems you can get into if you put tights or even stockings over your head age 12 when you're trying to pretend you're a baddie in a cop show. Anyway, the people's verdict is in, and it came in like this.
Yes, everyone's forgiving. Nick Green says, forgive that man. Just a mention of the greatest TV show ever gets forgiveness from me. What's more, I have a Granada and a Cortina. Miss D of Blackpool says, absolutely forgiven. Youth is a dangerous period of life where we all do stupid things. Brooke in Liverpool says, yes, absolute absolution from me because this made me laugh till I cried. Show mercy. Jill, totally forgiven for that wonderfully told tale that had me grinning on my evening walk whilst listening through my headphones. And finally, Mark in Castleford says, as they would have said in the Sweeney, get your trousers on, you nicked. Or in this case, get your stockings on, you nicked. Of course he's forgiven.
All right, your confession would be very welcome if you want, and if we use it, then you get a smart speaker. Then all you have to do, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. That's confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. It's confessions time. We would love to hear from you. If you have a confession, tell us. Now is a very good time to do it because there's a smart speaker in it for you if we use your confession. Sarah is about to get one for tonight's confession, which has a U certificate and is accompanied for unaccompanied minors. Suitable for pretty much everybody, I think. Don't be disappointed.
No.
I think you're going to like it, dear Father Simon and the Phalanx of Forgiveness. Already an impressive start from Sarah. When I was about 8 years old, my brother was about 4, my parents took us to rural Sweden for our annual summer holiday. We stayed in a log cabin that was located in a small clearing in the forest. It would have been early to mid-July, and I remember it never ever going dark. There were 2 or 3 other cabins in the clearing. The ground was sandy, and there was a sandy area surrounding the cabin, easily deep enough to make a sandcastle. The adjoining forest provided an opportunity for holiday entertainment, namely dragging 2 reluctant children on yet another walk. My father, who fancied himself as some sort of amateur animal tracker, would make observations as we were dragged around the forest, such as, look, a track made by a moose. Here is where a hare stood. Look,
Here's where a hare stood.
A red fox, a wolverine. Is that bog vegetation over there? You get the general idea. All my brother and I wanted to do was play football with the kids on holiday in the other cabins. They were all Swedish, but it didn't matter. Shouting "goal" and doing some kind of elaborate celebration appeared to be universally understood. Having been made to stare at through the eyes of an 8-year-old some desperately unimpressive animal tracks for the umpteenth time, I was rather bored of this entertainment, although it seemed to be a source of unending fascination for my father. The next morning I woke up early, had no idea what time it was, bright outside, but that wasn't really much of a help. Everyone else was asleep. The wooden floors were creaky, so I activated stealth mode and sneaked out of the cabin in my pyjamas, avoiding waking anyone. I poked at a few things with a stick for a bit, wiggled my toes in the sand. I then had the idea of making a moose track with my finger, seeing if I could recreate the tracks my father had been so keen on. It didn't require much skill, if I'm honest. It was just two C shapes, as in the letter C, facing each other with a line in the middle. Standing back, I was, however, pretty impressed with my artwork. I set about doing some more, and then some more, until I had circumnavigated the sand around the cabin with moose tracks. The kids from the other cabins were by now starting to emerge, and one of the boys said, "Vill du spela fotboll?" Which I think means you want to play football, but then he repeated it, "Vill du spela fotboll?" Anyway, he clearly did mean that. The meaning was clear and the accent was perfect.
Yes.
I ran off to play. In due course, my parents got up and I heard an excited voice say, Mary, come here." It's my father. He'd discovered the moose tracks and was studying them with interest. I sauntered over. My mother, Mary, asked if moose would really have come that close to the cabin. My father replied with an air of fatherly authority, "Yes, of course they do. They're very brave." A debate ensued, with my father wondering if it was one moose or two mooses. No, moose. A whole family of moose. He eventually decided it was a single moose, undoubtedly a large specimen with a particularly heavy tread. Of course, my brother and I were obliged to review the moose tracks as well, and my father delighted in pointing out how the moose had stood here, and then over there, and then...
Look, over there as well.
Here.
Yeah.
We traipsed around the caravan just like the moose had done. Anyway, then out came the family camera, and a few precious frames that should have been devoted to my brother and I were taken up with moose tracks. After a while, we were released back to play football, but now and again I glanced over and could see my father, hands on hips, still studying the tracks, walking around the cabin, seemingly muttering something, sometimes bent over them, then standing up again, and undoubtedly he was somewhere between wonder and puzzlement. Of course, for the rest of the holiday, playing in the sand was absolutely forbidden, and the moose tracks had to be undisturbed. I hadn't intended to dupe my father. I had, after all, just been playing in the sand to entertain myself after rising early. But after so much excitement engendered by the moose tracks, I didn't feel I could tell my father that it was actually me and my silky art skills who were actually the moose. And I'm afraid I still haven't told him, since, despite the lapse of 39 years or so, this is 1982, I am now 47. I seek not forgiveness from my father, who was delighted that a heavy-footed moose had chosen our cabin for its morning perambulation, nor from professional animal trackers who are unlikely to be fooled by my rudimentary skills. But I do seek forgiveness from my poor mother, who has had to endure many a dinner party with my father regaling the collected company with embellished stories of a loose moose wandering about our Swedish house. It's a nice reference there. Sarah, thank you very much indeed. A nice trick to play on your dad. So this is a shock news for the family. All is clear now. What do you say, Sister Susie from the pub?
Oh, well, I really enjoyed that one. And I think, it's harmless fun. For putting up with your dad being an amateur animal tracker, I think all is forgiven from me. Very well done, Sarah.
Okay, looking good, but let's check in with Matthew.
Well, I mean, let's begin by saying, not just the Swedish accent, but some actual Swedish words.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, come on. So, obviously, I'm going to forgive here, because, number one, obviously, Dad would have been so happy when he saw the tracks and being able to boast. And I love the fact that they then followed them all the way around the house. Don't disturb the tracks. Yes, absolutely love the moose. So yes, I'm definitely going to forgive.
And the plural of moose is moose, isn't it?
Moose.
Is it?
Yeah.
Mooses?
It's not mooses.
Meese?
No.
No.
The plural of moose is moose, definitely. Anyway, it's the people's verdict. That's what we're after. Can you help us with that? If you can, on the text 61054. Do you forgive Sarah, yes or no? 61054. You start your message with Simon, and the People's Verdict will be delivered in the middle of Tuesday. After the People's Verdict on tonight's confession, which a while back you heard about the moose loose around the Swedish house, courtesy of Sarah, because there was actually just Sarah with a twig and not a large, heavy moose, though her dad only found that out today.
Yeah.
People's Verdict, here it is.
So Lita Phipps in Flintshire in North Wales says, still laughing at the moose about the Who's story, totally forgiven. Doesn't matter what exotic destinations we take our kids to, they'll always be bored by going for walks.
Of course.
Love anything to do with mooses, as my husband's nickname is Moose. Gwyneth in Hertfordshire says, definitely forgive. Poor mum having to suffer that story for all those years. Anonymous says, not forgiven. I mean, come on, you could have told him at some point. Valley Jackie says, not forgiven. Never kind mocking your dad, however big of a pain he is. Serves you right having to suffer your mum listening to it repeatedly.
So we would love your confession. If you would like to win a smart speaker, all you have to do is to send us your confession. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Thank you very much for the confessions. If yours is used, you get a smart speaker. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Once you've heard tonight's The People's Verdict on 61054 for the text, you start your message with Simon. Today's comes from Claire. Simon, brother Matthew and sister Susie. My name is Claire, which I've already said, so let's get on with things. I now reside in the West Midlands. However, my confession relates to events which took place back in the 70s. I was a pupil at a rather posh grammar school for girls in the home counties. For the sake of its many high-standing former alumni, which include top surgeons, barristers, and even a government minister, I feel it is necessary not to name the school in question. Oh, go on. Nor even mention the county it was situated in.
Oh.
That's how vague we're going to be.
Okay.
Most of the pupils were locals with double-barreled surnames, and the school was situated in a leafy street full of very large houses. I, on the other hand, lived in a council house in the rather less posh county just over the border. Our games mistress was a former England hockey captain, but at the top of the tree was the formidable headmistress, who we shall call Miss Trunchbull. That's just the way it has to be, I think, and that seems fair. Every day we had an assembly. The pupils gathered in what can only be described as a large square well, surrounded by 4 elevated sides. Once all the pupils and teachers were in place for the assembly, Miss Trunchbull would arrive last of all, walk in with music playing her on. Yes, she was a head teacher with walk-on music,
Yeah, good for her.
and take her place on the school's antique, priceless throne. An elaborate affair that would grace... What? It would
Where's
grace-
my throne? That's
it
what
would
I'm saying.
grace a stately home. Not very much happened to disturb this hotbed of academia and restraint. That was until 1975, when I was in the 3rd year and a new English teacher arrived. I cannot remember his name, so I should call him Mr. Shakespeare. Mr. Shakespeare was no ordinary English teacher. He was larger than life, both in appearance and personality. He had a mane of long curly hair and a bushy beard, and bounced around the buildings with the enthusiasm of a large, ill-disciplined sheepdog. He was said to have had theatrical connections, I see, and although he wore a suit, he always looked slightly dishevelled and disreputable, as if he'd spent the previous night partying with Oliver Reed. Goodness knows how he passed the school's selection process.
Wow.
We were all smitten with Mr. Shakespeare. Plus, he announced that he would be producing and directing a play. The first play in the school's history. No doubt Miss Trunchbull viewed it with suspicion. Nevertheless, it was given the go-ahead and auditions began, with rehearsals planned to take place after school in the stage area of the assembly hall. Being a drama fan and having acting ambitions, I put myself forward. I was disappointed when the lead role went to someone else, but I told myself that Mr. Shakespeare had his reasons for giving the part to the most boring, monotonous third former in the school. I can, so you're over it.
Yeah.
I convinced myself he had his reasons. And I convinced myself that the 2 small parts allocated to me, which were firstly Henry VIII, not sure that's a small part, and secondly the ignominiously titled Woman, were a testament to my potential for
Yeah.
character acting. To add to the excitement, Mr. Shakespeare had managed to borrow a number of costumes from one of his chums at the RSC. I was to strut around the stage as Henry in a hugely oversized kingly robe previously worn by Donald Sinden. It even had a label in the neck with Donald Sinden's name on it.
Brilliant.
Now, better than that, Mr. Shakespeare thought that we should all muck in and help build the set. He even bought his own toolbox. Now, Miss Trunchbull had never been fond of anything practical taking place in the school, other than needlework and cookery, so the thought of bashing away with hammers, chisels, nails and saws seemed to everyone a little bit avant-garde. I, more than the rest of the cast, had plenty of time on my hands for set building because of the fleeting nature of my parts in the play, so I was thrilled when Mr. Shakespeare needed something sawing in half, and he entrusted me with the task while everyone else was rehearsing. I grabbed the saw and looked around for something suitable to use as a bench. I couldn't perch it on the stage, and there weren't any desks or tables in the assembly area, and then I spotted just what I needed. Miss Trunchbull's throne, of course, had a lovely long back, topped by 2 hefty, oversized ornamental scrolls. If I turned the throne over with the seat perpendicular to the floor, I could use the back of the throne as a bench. Everything was going well. What could go wrong?
Well, nothing
I
could
started
go wrong.
slowly, but as I gained confidence, my speed increased, and I developed a very effective sawing motion for a beginner. I was almost done when there was a loud thud. I'd sawed completely through the thing I was supposed to be sawing, but also the ornamental scrolls on the top of the throne.
Dear.
I looked around furtively, realised that the cast and Mr. Shakespeare hadn't noticed what I'd done. They were too absorbed in listening to the lead part giving a monotonous monologue about politics and lawyers and royal divorces. So I put the throne back above the well, and after a few attempts managed to perch the scrolls in the usual position held on by absolutely nothing. I didn't sleep well that night, and next morning we trooped in for assembly. Miss Trunchbull walked along the platform to her throne, accompanied by music, this time rather stirring symphonic-type music, which ended very appropriately with a drum roll, just as she made her last few steps and collapsed onto the throne. "Good morning, gals," she said imperiously, and sat down. And then, as you guessed it, the elaborate, oversized, show-off, mock Roman, but crucially unattached, carved wooden scrolls fell onto her ornamented head, causing great hilarity amongst everyone in the assembly. I was the only one not laughing, fearing that somehow I would be found out. She seethed, we held our breath, and then sang All Things Bright and Beautiful.
Obviously, yeah.
I need to seek forgiveness from Miss Spencer for spoiling her lovely throne. Most of all, though, I seek forgiveness from Mr. Shakespeare and his play, where I expect he was blamed for everything that happened. No doubt it reinforced Miss Spencer's view of theatrical performances as frivolous and dangerous, and no doubt it also halted the school's foray into the avant-garde for some considerable time, for which I apologise to all the girls who came after me. Don't remember what happened to Mr. Shakespeare after that. He must have known it was me, but he never said anything, and he never ratted on me, which makes him a top-class teacher. Can I have your forgiveness, says Claire from the posh school. Which we can't name. Well, we could name, but only for money. Sister Susie from the pub, what do you say to Claire, first of all?
Well, I think, who has walk-in music if you're not a wrestler?
It's a great idea for head teachers everywhere.
Head teachers everywhere. Do you know what? I feel for Claire. I've been there. We did Grease in our school, and sadly I got the role of dancing woman instead of any of the main parts, and never, ever got over it. So I'm going to forgive Claire just for that pure reason.
Brother Matthew.
I'd have to say I'm with head teacher Miss Trunchbull here, in that I'm also suspicious of the avant-garde, and
of course you are.
Actors do get over yourselves. You're just reading other people's lines out loud. So I am going to forgive, just because, if you're going to have walk-on music, you may as well have stuff collapse all over you at the same time. Adds to the drama. There you go, actors. Take that one. Donald Sinden and all. So yes, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, so it's the people's verdict. Do you forgive Claire, yes or no? It's all forgiveness so far. But I imagine actors and representatives of the avant-garde might be slightly displeased with the way Matt has been very rude about their profession. Anyway, it's 5:45. Time for Last Confession of the Week. If yours gets read out, you get a smart speaker, confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Once you've heard today's confession, the people's verdict will be expected via text 61054. First word of your message has to be Simon. Today's has a certificate of... You just check with... I think it's a 12 certificate, producer Susie.
Oh,
you think?
Completely
here
agree.
we go.
It's a 12. Okay.
Okay.
It comes from Jazzy Jeff. Thank you, Jazzy Jeff, for sending in today's confession. Dear consciences of the nation, bringers of truth and guardians of justice, having recently retired from the travails of teaching history, I feel an urgent need to seek absolution from an event that is still burnt into my memory nearly 25 years after the event. And let me tell you, once you know what happens, these will be burnt into your memory
Really?
as well.
Oh, good. Good.
I was always one, says Jazzy Jeff, to be in the work hard and play hard brigade.
Okay.
Now, already I've lost patience with Jazzy
There
Jeff.
we go.
Because we've all met people who say that. And basically it means I behave very, very badly on a regular basis. But it's okay because I'm very hard at work, you know.
Yeah.
No.
Anyway, no, it just means you're a moron. Anyway, so Jazzy Jeff continues. Sorry for that little diversion.
Interlude.
Work hard and play hard brigade. And after a hard week's teaching, I thought nothing of spending the weekend supporting a variety of hostelries and clubs. One such establishment operated as a kind of late-night club and disco for a clientele that would be best described as divorced and desperate. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't imagine it was your kind of place, Father Simon, to be honest. Nor Sister Susie, and I'm not quite sure about...
No. Moral of the sewer rat, so you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As I quite easily fitted into both of those categories and had done for some years, it was naturally my last port of call on a Friday night, as it stayed open till 2. I think I mentioned that. Imagine my delight then when one Friday I attracted the attention of an attractive 30-something who seemed vaguely familiar and seemed to strike up a quick and warm rapport with me. Soon we were locked in discussions of early Etruscan pottery, Swedish foreign policy after 1600, and although she wasn't sure about some of the finer points of the Schleswig-Holstein question, I was happy to explain.
Very good.
Wow.
Has the Schleswig-Holstein question been discussed on Greatest Hits Radio before? I'm happy to put that right. Indeed, says Jazzy Jeff, such was the rapport that we soon decided to continue the earnest and intense academic discussions back at her place.
Okay.
Time passed.
Yes, it did, didn't it? Yeah. Yes, it did. Yeah.
The next morning, I threw on my discarded multicoloured T-shirt, bunged on my tatty boxer shorts, and headed down to find the kitchen and coffee. Succeeding at both, I was enjoying a brew when I heard a sharp gasp from the kitchen doorway, and then what can best be...
Oh, no.
could best be described as an indignant and horrified shout with a side order of disbelief.
Oh, no.
It went like this. Sir, what are you doing? What are you doing in my kitchen?
Oh, no.
To my horror, I locked horns with Foghorn Frida, a 13-year-old who I'd only said cheerio to about 24 hours earlier as she exited my classroom. You know, I'd regularly failed to engage in learning, and in a very teenage way, she'd always let me know that my lessons were rubbish. And the subject worse. Before I'd even finished the world's lamest response, I was just passing, and I thought I thought I needed some coffee in my underwear.
Yeah.
She looked me up and down, swung on her heel, and stormed upstairs. No wonder her mum looked vaguely familiar. I'd been chatting to her at a parents' evening just a few weeks earlier. And here is my need for forgiveness. Not from Foghorn Frida. Her mum and I dated for 6 months and she eventually got used to it. But to all my colleagues who over the rest of the term had their lesson ruined by pupils butting in with such questions like, is it true that Mr. Jeff was at Frida's? Did you hear that Mr. Jeff was at... Does he really wear green and yellow boxer shorts?
Wow.
No call for that. I throw myself even at your mercy. Well, I'm not sure how this is going to go for Jazzy Jeff, but I do think the line, sir, what are you doing in my kitchen, is the kind of thing that will stay with you for a while. Let's check in for forgiveness. Sister Susie, producer of the show.
Yeah, well, I It's a nice story. I think all teachers probably fear that thought of going out with one of their students' parents. But I don't like that he called himself Jazzy Jeff. It's a bit like that work hard, play hard. I'm jazzy. And also calling the club divorced and desperate. He dated this Foghorn Frida's mum for a couple of months after that.
Yes.
And you classed her as divorced and desperate. So for those reasons, from me, not forgiven.
Oh, I like this. It's a not forgiven from Sister Susie. Things are looking bad for Jazzy Jeff. I might have added the Jazzy myself, by the way.
Oh, really?
But anyway, I
It's
think
something he would do.
I think he deserved
Yes.
it. Brother Matthew.
Takes two to tango on this, really, doesn't it, Jeff? I'm going to say, my instinct is to forgive. However, the green and yellow boxers, what on earth is going on there? Green and yellow, those don't go together in
Norwich
boxes.
City supporter.
Oh, really? Well, that's as maybe. Obviously, this has been seared into the memory of poor Foghorn Frida, and indeed for all of us, I think. So I'm going to err on the side of forgiving Jazzy Jeff, despite the name, despite the playing hard, working hard, and the green and yellow boxers, because I'm in a forgiving kind of mood.
Okay, people's verdict, please. 61054. You start your message with Simon. Forgiven or no? People's verdict time.
Sorry, I've just swallowed some water.
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
here's
I'll
what they
cue
say.
you again. Here's the people's verdict. This is what they're saying.
Okay, so Felix says, forgiven. It's surprising how easily this can happen.
No, it's not.
With thankfully no more details. Joanne in Guildford says, best confession ever. Absolutely forgiven, roaring with laughter. And to be fair, he did describe himself as divorced and desperate too. Neil in Brighton, forgiven, made my beer come out of my nose. Ian in St Helens, definitely not guilty. Steady on, Ian. Having had more than my fair share of escapades in my younger days, I can definitely identify with him. And finally, Chris in Cumbria says, totally forgiven. And it's at times like these that you wonder, what would Miss Jean Brodie do?
Well, exactly to the nub
Not
of the matter. Okay, so Jazzy Jeff gets the smart speaker. If you have a confession for us, you know what you have to do. Send it on an email, please. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.